Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Friday, April 4th, 2025. Quick shout out to Antonia, who turns 2 today. But on Fridays in general, we deal with human behavior and justifications. And the question I want to pursue today is this notion of the difference between information, the pursuit of information versus the pursuit of truth. So I want to start with this question. Why do some people engage in rampant science denialism? Or more broadly, why do they refuse to accept information that's provably true as, well, true? Again, an important qualification at the outset. Information is not the same thing as truth. Information abounds. It's everywhere. With respect to humans and their abilities to process information and share information between two or more people, we understand that every form of communication transmits some kind of information. So generally speaking, it's helpful then to have information to, look at the root, to inform decision making. Who doesn't want to be informed? So in science, we often talk about having subjects sign off on or give their informed consent to participate. But again, it would be naive to simply equate information with truth. Humans generate all kinds of fascinating information. We create stories and myths and narratives, fictions of all kinds and fantasies. We sometimes suffer from delusions. We commit errors and so much more. And none of that's the same thing as producing truth. In fact, often quite the opposite. So Yuval Harari, some of you may know from his books, Sapiens, argues that getting to the truth or producing truth has some real challenges, but especially in comparison with producing non-truth or fiction. He argues, quote, "The truth is a rare and costly kind of information. It's a small subset of all the information in the world," end quote. So now considering the following, I would like you to look at this and see if this makes any sense to you. Okay, ready? Here we go. Does that mean anything to you? Probably. What do we know that's true about what you just observed? Well, there's the mathematical aspect, right? Based on number theory, and that can be used to verify that the statement's true. So is it true that 2 plus 2 equals 4? Well, nearly everyone learns about the rules of counting from an early age and might easily be persuaded. And they'd justify the truthfulness of their statement accordingly. You almost certainly would as well, because of the logic that's involved, and if you had more familiarity with the proof involved. So we know this to be a true statement, don't we? Again, assuming we have a common language and means of communicating with one another. But there's also more to it than that. There's the visual component. Is it true that I provided for you a visual representation that contains the symbols 2 plus 2 equals 4? You'd probably reason as follows. Well, I'm watching a vlog and I see these symbols that he's put before me on the screen. And based on my language and cultural background, it's true that I'm seeing this mathematical statement, 2 plus 2 equals 4. And I justify what I'm seeing accordingly, that is visually, and through my interpretation, through my cultural lens. And then, of course, there's the behavioral aspect, too. Is it true that Dr. J actually presented the statement 2 plus 2 equals 4 on screen? Or did he put that piece of paper in front of his face or partially blocking his face? And once again, you'd probably say, well, yeah, of course that's true, based on the visual evidence that I just saw, and probably based on the auditory evidence, my speaking and describing what I'm doing, all of which would confirm that that's what I did. You might suggest that he took the paper away and then he brought the paper back a second time just to demonstrate or to reveal what it was he was trying to share with us in terms of that mathematical expression. And so again, that's a truth statement now, but about my behavior, something that you can confirm, you can verify that I did. Okay? So again, this is all, I'm sure, painfully obvious, but there's a deeper point here. There's a lot of truth that I've just shared with you. So you could walk away right now and say, well, I can believe then that 2 plus 2 equals 4, based on my understanding of basic mathematics and logic and so on. I can believe that these symbols that were chosen, that Dr. J presented, represent a visual depiction of that statement. And I can believe that Dr. J was responsible for putting up a piece of paper in front of his face to allow me to observe the statement 2 plus 2 equals 4. So that's a best case scenario, and then we could readily conclude, well, yes, it's all true then, all of those things. But again, what I want you to do is think about this a little bit more deeply then. I'm hinting at the complexity of the statement behind, or what's implicated in this notion of that's true. There are many different kinds and perhaps layers of truth. And these different kinds of truth require different kinds of proof, different kinds of evidence, and different kinds of justifications. Perhaps most shockingly of all, we typically do not know enough about most things to be able to justify why they are true and why we believe that these certain things are true that we believe. So, for example, I learned long ago, maybe you did as well, that cigarettes were bad for your health, and that cigarettes heighten the risk of lung cancer, among other things. Now, is that actually true? Well, I think so, but I haven't done the actual research. I haven't studied the issue myself. I haven't systematically reviewed the evidence. And even if I have, am I competent or qualified to be able to reach the proper conclusion about the evidence? Probably not. And I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way. I just mean that that's something literally I've never committed to doing, at least with respect to the research on cigarette smoking and its relationship to cancer or health in general. So, and yet, at the same time, I will often justify my belief, or I'll say that I believe that to be true, based on my exposure to a variety of different sources and information and what I've learned over the years, including my favorite line, based on my own research. A lot of people like to use that. Nothing wrong with that, but you'll see that there's some limitations too. And so this leads to a crucial observation. Our knowledge of the truth must always depend upon our relationships with others who are sharing the information. What we define as true largely depends on the source of the information and our relationship with that particular source or sources. Truth requires trust in ourselves, our senses, and our reasoning, but also trust in our relationships with others. We can probably all agree that some people clearly know more. They have more knowledge, at least in some areas, than we do. In many cases, that's patently obvious. My wife knows far more about speaking and reading and writing Farsi than I'll ever know. But she also knows a lot more about doing healing touch, dance, cooking, nursing, and countless other subjects. So if we know someone who has more information and a deeper understanding of that information than we do, what do we say? We think of that person as being more knowledgeable. They have not just the information, but they have more knowledge than we have of the subject matter. And we're probably going to believe that person and their understanding of the truth and their truth statements at least more so than we would trust ourselves alone or without the same background. Again, it depends on the specific area in which they're, pontificating, or about which they're speaking. So when we say then that I think that that's true, or I think that something's not true, we have to consider the source and our relationship with the source, as well as the evidence that they're able to marshal in support of their claims. And yet, that's often where we falter for several reasons. I've talked about this a little bit previously, but first and foremost, we all have cognitive biases that are deeply rooted in our capacities to process information efficiently. Cognitive biases refer to any systematic errors in thinking that occur when people process and interpret information. Our brains are constantly being flooded with information. We can only process so much. So cognitive biases actually can help in the sense that they allow us to simplify and expend less energy by selectively processing information. The biases afford us the chance then to make sense out of our worlds quickly and to reach decisions with relative speed. In many rather mundane situations, our cognitive biases then are quite helpful. The problems tend to arise, however, if they keep us from learning new things or they impede our deeper understanding of the issue at hand. So, for example, if you've read one article on a subject matter, okay, you might assume that you know a lot about that, or you know more than you did previously. But what if you were to go further and assume that basically you know all that you really need to know, and you therefore have an informed opinion? Again, that may or may not be true. The point is that really enough? Do you have enough information? And again, are you competent to evaluate the quality of that information? I can't just pick up any scientific journal anywhere and be competent to evaluate the content. And that's true if I listen to, somebody's deep philosophy with which I'm unfamiliar, and they're explaining these concepts that I've never heard of. I may understand it, but there's a very good chance that I would only have a limited understanding if I didn't have previous familiarity, information, and learning associated with that specific field. So we're all limited in that sense. None of us can know. We're not omniscient. We can't know everything. And quite frankly, we're only really good at learning certain things depending upon our genetics, our background, our exposure when we were young, etc. Okay, so that's one of the problems that we have then. And it's also something that's sometimes referred to as confirmation bias, the degree to which we'll simply, pay attention to those news stories or that information or those individuals who confirm our opinions and our views rather than allowing us to delve more deeply or broadly into the subject matter. And as a general principle, we tend to be more biased in that sense towards those with whom we are closest, our intimates as such. And that's often a byproduct of trust. Plus, we generally like to hang around people who tend to agree with us, right? And that's fine. I'm not knocking any of that. It's normal. The point is that you have to be careful with that too, especially if you're truly intent upon pursuing the truth of the matter. And then at the other end of the continuum are our tribal allegiances to the leaders with status and power who might claim to speak for people like me and you, and especially in the realms of politics and religion, for example. But it could be in science or other realms as well. While such people may indeed have specialized forms of knowledge and areas of expertise, they almost assuredly do, they often make their truth claims, or make certain kinds of truth claims, I should say, that far exceed their knowledge and training and expertise. And that's where you have to be extremely careful. The charismatic cult leaders are perhaps the classic example. So my general advice then would be to always look carefully at what people's credentials are and try to assess the following. What kinds of claims are they making? Are they trying to make scientific or factual claims? Or are they trying to make moral or religious and or political claims? These are entirely different. There's a crucial difference because scientific or factual truth claims require different evidentiary standards to be able to verify something as being plausibly or reasonably assessed as true or false. So there's a whole systematic way to verify and falsify information that's associated with the scientific method. If the person's engaged in making moral, religious, or political claims, then these are what we can describe as normative truth claims, or provisional answers to the ought or should questions that dominate so much of social life. So, for example, do you think we ought to have a single-payer universal healthcare system or a private insurer model? That's an ought question. And you can make truth claims about that, or what you believe to be true, from a normative or from a moral perspective. But that's different than making a scientific claim. Should we outlaw the death penalty entirely in the U.S.? Or, for that matter, should Canada consider reinstating the death penalty for the most egregious or violent offenders? Should we create this law or that law, and so on? These are not fact-based scientific truth claims, and so as such, they require different kinds of evidence and arguments and justifications. So as a general rule then, I want to know whether the people providing the information then have done their due diligence. Are they just trying to get me on their side, or do they genuinely appear to be searching for the truth? Do they display what I consider to be the requisite combination of confidence and curiosity, balancing certainty with humility, and so on? Okay, so let me summarize just a couple more reasons then why getting at the truth can be such a nettlesome problem. Recall that we are in some senses neurologically pre-wired to process information quickly to help us navigate the world efficiently. And as noted, that's great in many situations, but it's not the optimal strategy for making truth claims. Instead, to arrive at credible truth claims, at least within the realm of science, and typically other fields as well, requires a huge investment of time and energy to do the research required, to gather the evidence, to wade through and analyze the reams of information that bear on the issue. And that's why most of us spend years, several years, getting our PhDs or getting medical degrees to become experts in respective fields. And even then, we only have limited expertise because we can only study a few things at most deeply. And that's true of just about anything. So to become a world-class pianist or a musician of any kind, you'd have to put in the 8 to 10 or 12-hour days for many years to arrive at the pinnacle of your profession, or to become truly an expert and world-class in your discipline. Now, to get a PhD, I would argue that's actually quite a bit easier, they say, compared to becoming a world-renowned pianist. But the similarity is that you still have to put in countless hours across countless days, again, usually spanning at least a few years, in order to be able to earn that PhD. So just as the pianist trains in their specialty and develops the technical expertise and the knowledge of music, the PhD has to train their minds and develop the technical expertise and acquire vast amounts of knowledge in their fields. And so that's why, at least personally, I've always admired people who've spent years honing their crafts to be exceptional at what they do. I spent an hour one day just watching a guy put up crown molding in our living room some years back. And the reason I did that is because it was obvious to me he was so skilled both as a carpenter and in plastering the joints. And I wanted to see him, do his work. It was incredible. He was a master. And the finished product was something I hadn't seen before. And that was just crown molding. But I thought, wow, that's quite remarkable. So indeed, a master carpenter or electrician or in any field requires years of training and study and practice, both technical and informational in nature. So yes, as a result, I'll trust these individuals much more than those who don't have the same credentials and training and background. Now, in contrast, there's all kinds of information that can be produced almost effortlessly, especially in the realms of fiction or creative writing or just in giving speeches of various kinds. You can say the first thing that enters into your mind. And if you're really good at spinning a yarn, as they say, you could convince others, or at least some people, to buy into what you're saying, and maybe even convince them of the truth or the veracity of what you're saying. Again, back to Yuval Harari, he states simply, quote, "The truth tends to be complicated because reality is complicated," end quote. And people often then prefer the simpler stories rather than the complicated ones. Plus, many times, people often just don't want the truth, especially if the truth elicits pain or discomfort. In fact, we might be motivated to avoid knowing the truth, or we like to say that we don't necessarily want to face the truth. A colloquial expression that we often might use would be something along the lines of, well, I don't really want to deal with that because that's an inconvenient truth. Or as I like to say, the truth often inconveniences us, meaning the truth might have serious implications for our current lifestyles and our well-being and so forth. So, now, a very simple example, mundane and kind of funny. Do you know how long it took me just to give up Coca-Cola? The sugary Coke. Right? And who among us really wants to read the labels on the foods that we're consuming to see how many calories we're consuming in any given dose? Right? Probably not many of us. Right? And of course, more dramatically, how many of us truly want to open up the doors to our closets to reveal the skeletons that might be buried there? Right? So in many instances, we're really driven not to get at the truth, or we want to hide the truth. And that even includes the courts of law. Like, how often do you really want to present the truth of the facts of the matter if they might serve to disadvantage us? We'd want to figure out a way to cover that up, wouldn't we? Most people. So I always have to laugh when they say, I just want the truth. You can't handle the truth. In fact, in many instances, again, in the courts of law, we're trying to put a particular spin on the facts. We want to color them a particular way. Okay? And so, again, generally speaking then, we don't want to face the facts if the facts make us uncomfortable, or if the truth hurts us, or we find it painful. Instead, we tend to want to do stuff that we find pleasant, stuff that we find attractive or self-affirming. Right? We want the stuff that makes us look good, that makes us feel good about ourselves, and so on. And that leads to another key point then. That is, to get at the truth of the matter requires that we develop the mechanisms and the institutions that support the costly, complex, and challenging endeavor of pursuing the truth. We need robust systems that encourage that Jeffersonian ideal where he wrote that here we are not afraid to follow the truth wherever it may lead us, nor tolerate any error, so long as reason is free to combat it. And I might just add, and empirical evidence, so long as reason and empirical evidence are available to help us combat those errors that we might make. And so, in general, I find that the greatest and the most creative geniuses that I've ever known, or that either personally or those that I admire, are the people who have been pursuing the pursuit of truth without the drive for commercial success necessarily, without the carrot of power being dangled before them, and even without concern for, fame and fortune in general. Right? Yet too often these days, the pursuit of truth has indeed been co-opted in the service of financial prosperity or political power, or even the notion of just becoming a celebrity. So the people that I trust the most then are those who have committed and engaged in a lifelong quest for truth. They've invested their time and energy and their brain power to acquiring information and developing a much more profound knowledge about their subject matter. It's the people who are driven by the passion to pursue the truth, regardless, again, of where it might lead them. And they're willing then to accept the consequences of that knowledge and understanding. And so I do think there are experts, and there are experts everywhere, but typically just more so in their specialized fields where they've trained for those many years to investigate the nature of reality and behavior in all of its different forms and complexity, using the most systematic and rigorous standards available, the techniques and the technologies and so forth, and been willing then to correct, to be wrong. That openness to learning and correcting the errors along the way. And in contrast, and this is where I'll wrap up today, for those who knowingly spew falsehoods or they denigrate people and the robust work that they've done just because they want to curry favor with political bigwigs, or because they're, again, trying to take advantage or scam us for profit. These are the kind of intellectual or truth vampires. I don't know if that's a great word, but they basically suck the blood and the beauty out of the pursuit of truth. And I just can't listen to those people for very long. I don't find much to be gained from listening to people who are driven by, again, the pursuit of lying or the art of lying, or just want to, spew falsehoods and negativity about their rivals and that sort of thing. It doesn't interest me at all. And then there are just many regular folks who, for whatever reasons, and maybe sometimes choose to be woefully ignorant. They just don't want to learn. They don't care to learn. So it's not much I can really say to them, and I'm not here to, judge them per se. It's just not my style. It's not what I find particularly interesting. Instead, I find I get the most inspiration by pursuing truth and by listening to others who are genuinely interested in the pursuit of truth. And so, again, speaking just for myself, I sort of search out every day, not just new information, but I want to acquire new knowledge. I want to learn something new. I want to increase my understanding of how different facets of the world work, different aspects of human behavior, different aspects of nature in general. Sometimes I learn a lot in a given day. Sometimes I don't learn much. But I always learn something. And that's certainly what drives me. And I'll continually try to learn. And for that matter, I'll continually be correcting the mistakes that I make along the way. Inevitably, I'll make mistakes too. Inevitably, I'll lack the full understanding and the requisite knowledge to be able to communicate something as effectively as I'd like. Now, I don't do that self-consciously. I try not to do that. I try to give the best information, and I try to share the best knowledge we have at our disposal at any given moment in time. But again, I'm limited. I don't have expertise in every area. And so I have to rely upon others. And then if you're listening to this, I have to hope that you can trust me and rely on me to give you the best information and to share the best knowledge that we had, at least at a given moment in time. And then again, if we build upon that knowledge, or if I've made errors, I'd like to be able to come back and correct those. It's a very open-ended, continual process of learning. And as I've said before, the day that I'm no longer interested in learning something new and improving myself or improving my understanding, that'll be the day. It'll be a good day to die. My work will be done here on this planet. But that won't come for quite some time, I don't think. At least that's not the way I feel now. I still feel like a kid in many respects, constantly wide-eyed and looking out at the world and with wonder and amazement. And I love learning about the world. And I'm okay with making mistakes and being wrong. I'll happily correct those moving forward. It's inevitable. Okay, well, until next time, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and share hugs in abundance. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.